Good morning and welcome to all of those who have joined us for today's briefing. San Francisco's 800 communities of faith and religious institutions are hubs for our most vulnerable residents. Among these are the homeless, the food insecure, the disabled, the undocumented, the aging, and the working poor, and so many others. Religious leaders are frontline ambassadors ministering daily to these vulnerable sectors. Today, the San Francisco Interfaith Council hosts City Controller Ben Rosenfield and Office of Economic and Workforce Development Director Joaquin Torres for an online briefing of the COVID-19 coronavirus economic impact on San Francisco and the city's strategy and response relief programs. Before we begin, allow me to introduce the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Kaushik Roy, for some words of welcome and the reading of the Interfaith Council's statement.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this monthly meeting that, of course, is being held virtually as opposed to in person. We hope you are all safe and taking care of yourselves. Just very briefly, as Michael mentioned, my name is Kaushik. It's my honor to be the chair of the board of the council. And on behalf of the entire board, we just want to welcome you again and also thank you and your faith communities for being such steadfast partners with us and the city as we try to respond to this most surreal of pandemics. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, at the beginning of every Interfaith Council event or gathering, we read the Interfaith Statement. But before I do that, I would be remiss if I didn't make a special acknowledgement to Michael Pappas and Cynthia Zambukis. I'm not sure if there is a dynamic duo of staff anywhere that gets as much done as these two do. And especially in the last few weeks, they have continued to go above and beyond, even for the high expectations we all have of them. So thank you to Michael and Cynthia. And you will be hearing from them later, but I also want to give my real appreciation to the members of the city who are joining us this morning, Ben Rosenfield and Joaquin Torres. Thank you for all you're doing. We want to thank everyone in the mayor's administration and of course the mayor herself, who has just shown remarkable leadership in these uncharted waters. So this is the San Francisco Interfaith Council statement. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaushik. And I really want to thank you for your ongoing support. I could not have asked for a better board chair, and bless you and your family. If we've learned anything in this season where it's necessary to cultivate community in the midst of isolation, it's the importance of faith and spiritual care. As the Judeo-Christian world enters into these most sacred days of its Passover and Easter religious observances, and our Muslim sisters and brothers will soon embark upon their month-long journey through Ramadan, to ground us in prayer, I invite Rabbi Michael Lezak of Glide Church's Center for Social Justice to lead us in an opening reflective moment.
Good morning, everyone, from my Prius in front of my apartment. Nice to see you all. Today is the first day of Passover, when Jews around the world celebrate the our exodus from slavery in Egypt. A brief Hebrew lesson. The word for Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, which at its core is a word that means a squeezed or a narrow place. For when we are enslaved, we have no capacity to move. So before I go into my opening prayer, a brief story from Glide, where I'm a rabbi in the Center for Social Justice. Each day at Glide, we continue to serve close to 2,000 meals a day and helping people in our walk-in center and our harm reduction services. I was in front of Glide 2 days ago in the pouring rain as we were serving people we were doing our best to keep them socially distanced. And as I looked across the street, I noticed that there was a man in cotton shorts and a cotton sweatshirt in the pouring rain, sweeping the area around his tent. And I'm thinking firstly about the preponderance of people of color who are walking in front of Glide and the connection not only to slavery of Jews, but to slavery in America. And I hold up for you here, matzah, not the tastiest Jewish treat on the planet, but one that reminds us of our exodus. For we didn't have enough time to fully bake, to let the bread rise. We eat this 8 days in a row to not just tell the story, but to actually live the story. For when we immerse ourselves in the story, we want to remember that not only was it a story of the past, but a story of the present. The formula we recite, I'm gonna read to you and translate, and then offer my blessing. When we pull the matzah off the table, we say this formula: Ha lachma anya. This here is the bread of poverty, the bread of desperation. Di achalu ahavtana aram de Mitzrayim, that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Kol dichvin yete veyechol. All who are hungry, let them come in and eat. All who are in need, let them come in and celebrate Passover. Hashtahacha l'shana haba'a de'ara Yisrael. Now, right now, we are here. Next year in the land of Israel. Hashta avdei l'shana haba'a b'nei chorin. And right now we are enslaved. Next year, let us be free. I share this with you because I love the image of being able to hold both the immense, immeasurable pain of slavery and the vision of the way the world should be in one phrase. And I think our work right now as the Interfaith Council and all of us who are lined up here is not only to be intimately present in the pain and poverty of this moment, but to be able to pull up a periscope up and out and to look beyond the pain of this moment and to think about how we might summon our collective power to moral authority, to moral responsibility, and not only dream up, but to actualize a world in which every resident of this city and of this country of ours deserves to live in. With that, I turn it back to Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi, and please extend our love and appreciation to all of our sisters and brothers at Glide. Amen. For all they're doing. Bless you.
And you.
Before we get into the substance of our program, I did want to take just a brief moment to share with you an overview of what the Interfaith Council has been doing. As that member of the San Francisco Department of Emergency Management's community branch, from the outset of the pandemic, the Interfaith Council has been called upon to liaise with our city's 800 communities of faith. The San Francisco Interfaith Council has played an integral role in disseminating time-sensitive and critical city communications to our broad constituencies. Behind the scenes, we are also assisting and guiding faith leaders through these uncertain times and facilitating clarity with our civic partners when those requests are being made. We have and continue to harvest, compile, and disseminate communications of congregation leaders to their congregants, as well as having created a specific link for sharing online worship services. We continue to work with city departments to identify religious-owned facilities to serve as extended shelters in order to thin existing shelters for compliance with coronavirus physical distancing requirements. We've connected those with access to excess food with the CEOs of our city's faith-based social service agencies, so in turn, they can route those resources to the food insecure. As requested, the Interfaith Council has coordinated online briefings for our faith leaders with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as well as Mayor London Breed and Department of Public Health officials. And just yesterday, in anticipation of Passover and Easter observances, I was invited to present at the Mayor's daily press conference at the Emergency Operations Center at Moscone South. Working closely with San Francisco Interfaith Council Treasurer John McKnight, who most recently has been deployed as the Department of Emergency Management's coordinator of the community branch, the San Francisco Interfaith Council will be hosting weekly online briefings for faith leaders, beginning today's session focusing on the economic impact of the coronavirus, as well as relief programs being offered by the city. Next week's session will take up the mental and behavioral health impact of the coronavirus, with focused attention being put on fear, isolation, anxiety, and services and resources available to faith leaders to respond. Today's briefing is yet another mission-aligned convening role the San Francisco Interfaith Council is playing in bringing leaders of different faiths together to build understanding and serve our community. And now without further ado, allow me to introduce our featured guest. And I just want to say a very special thank you to our city controller, Ben Rosenfield, and the director of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, Joaquin Torres, for taking time out of their very busy and demanding schedules to be with us. Ben Rosenfield serves as the city controller. As chief fiscal officer and auditor, he provides fiscal management and oversight of an $11 billion budget and is responsible for budgetary planning and monitoring of the receipt, collection, and disbursement of city funds. The city controller is responsible for the city's financial management systems, internal controls and reports, provides public policy and economic analysis, estimates the cost of ballot measures, provides payroll services for the city's employees, and directs performance and financial audits of all city activities. Joaquin Torres is the director of the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Mr. Torres leverages resources across city departments to create opportunities for all and maximize equitable and economic social impact for the benefit of San Francisco communities, residences, of businesses, and neighborhoods. In pursuit of these goals, the Office of Economic and Workforce Development provides citywide leadership and coordination for workforce development, business development, neighborhood economic development, film, small business, and development planning. Forgive me for reading those, but I just think that as a way of context, the breadth of their responsibilities will lend so much to today's conversation. I think what we've been seeing more than anything is that this pandemic is multifaceted. We know that there is a physical and health impact that is being caused by the coronavirus, as well as an emotional and spiritual and psychological one, but also the devastating economic impact we are seeing on the news does not discriminate. And so we have these two wonderful guests to share with us today the economic impact on San Francisco, as well as the relief programs that the city is offering in response. So Ben, would you start us off with just a sense and an overview of the economic impact, and Joaquin, if you would chime in also regarding the response efforts that the city is offering.
Thank you for having us here today, Michael. I'd be happy to start us off with a short presentation on some of the economic impacts that we're tracking in my office. And these returns are early, and much like the health epidemic, we're in the midst of the news here changes daily, and we're continuing to monitor what's going on. But at a high level, we know that the economic impacts here in San Francisco and around the country and in California have been stark and immediate. We know that the shelter-in-place order in San Francisco affects 14,000 businesses in the city, either fully or partially. And we know that those businesses employ about 166,000 people. So that's over 20% of San Francisco's employment base is affected directly by shelter in place. Those businesses in a typical month generate almost $3 billion in revenue, and those employees earn almost $1 billion in monthly pay. We know that statewide, we've seen a historic surge in new jobless claims. even for the 2-week period ending on March 25th, which is the most recent one that we have information on. We expect that that will rise quickly at the end of March and through April. The state of California began the month of March with unemployment of 4%. I would expect that by the time we see unemployment rates at the end of March, that 4% will have grown to over 10% in a single month. And we would expect that that unemployment rate to continue to climb through the month of April, potentially reaching 20% or higher. Truly historic times. To give a sense of how dramatically the landscape's changed, I thought I would provide a quick summary here of what one major forecaster, this is Moody's Analytics, was projecting for US GDP growth for the year and how quickly it's changed. So this is their January forecast, showing quarterly growth through 2020, calendar year 2020, slow and steady, about 1.5% average for the year. On March 23rd, early in this epidemic, they dramatically revised down their forecast and showed for the first time in 10 years, projection of GDP decline in the second quarter of the fiscal year, or of the calendar year. That's the quarter we have just started, and projected almost a 5% decline in GDP for that quarter, and then a slow recovery beginning after that. Just 4 days after issuing that forecast, they revised their forecast again. And this was as the effects of the pandemic here in California and on the East Coast was becoming clearer. They significantly revised down that forecast. Rather than a 5% decline in the second quarter, in this March 27th update, they then updated and projected an almost 20% decline in gross domestic product here in the US, and a much slower recovery thereafter. In an upside scenario, they predicted that the US would get back to full employment in 2022. In a slow recovery, it would take till 2025, almost 5 years before we would get back to full employment. I think folks have probably seen this chart, and it's now dated. The new unemployment claims were reported this morning for the US, but this puts the surge in some historic context, I think. This is the last 50 years of weekly unemployment claims in the US, and you can see how stark that increase in unemployment is on the far right. Over 6 million new jobless claims filed in the last period. That's almost tenfold higher than any previous week through multiple recessions in this 50-year period. Here in San Francisco, we're modeling, obviously, losses, both as it affects our economy and our budget. We're using 2 scenarios at the moment, one that's a more limited impact scenario and one that's extended. They differ really in the severity and the duration of the short-term economic losses we will face, and then the pace of recovery thereafter. In the limited scenario, recovery beginning at the end of 2020 and largely taking hold in 2021. In a more severe scenario, stretching to 2021 and beyond. I should say that neither of these is the worst case scenario. These are ones that, given forecasts we're reviewing, we feel are more likely to occur. The financial impacts are felt not just obviously in the economy by businesses and workers here in the city, but by the city itself, which relies on taxes to provide public services. These are projections of the city's financial shortfalls, our budget shortfalls that we expect to result. Current year gap over the remaining 3 months of as much as almost $300 million. Next year, those gaps rising to potentially over 10% of our general fund budget. And then taken together, the 27-month period, the remainder of this year and two coming ones, we now expect a gap of about 1.1 billion to 1.7 billion on the city's $6 billion general fund budget. Obviously significant challenges. The mayor and the board have begun working on this. The mayor has issued instructions to first focus on closing the current year gap. And the mayor and the board have now delayed the city's budget process by 2 months so that we can get our feet under ourselves, understand what's going on financially, and then work to prepare a budget for the years ahead. Very quickly, I thought I would provide a quick overview on some of the city's key response activities related to the emergency. As folks know, the first and most significant act by the city, taken together with other Bay Area counties, was shelter-in-place order, intended to flatten the curve. That has been combined with a large effort to plan for surge on the medical system here in San Francisco, like everywhere else in the country, and that work's well underway at this point. The San Francisco Department of Public Health and the Hospital Council in the city have now expanded hospital capacity in the city by almost 90% for both beds, ICU beds, and ventilators. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment to both protect and retain health staff during this crisis. And obviously, the emergency creates a far greater demand, which was already very significant, on safety net services here in the city. There is a huge amount of effort going into expanding food services, providing temporary shelters, predominantly through hotels, hygiene and inspection, in particular at congregate SRO housing in the city, and our homeless shelters and other places. As the crisis kind of continues, managing community spread is and will continue to be of growing importance. Reporting and modeling of what's occurring here in San Francisco, expanding testing capacity, and then contact tracing, so that outbreaks can be quickly detected, those individuals can be cared for and isolated. And then obviously beginning work on recovery, planning for the recovery. What does the end of this look like? The city has been working to both support our workers and our nonprofit providers with continuity of pay during these hard times. There is, Joaquin will talk in a minute about aid for private workers and businesses here in the city. And the mayor and board president Yee have now announced an economic recovery task force that will be taking up the tough task of how do we recover from this. And I will gloss over this last slide only because I think Joaquin will touch on it, but obviously the challenge here for local government, like all governments, is we have an unprecedented need for public services at this moment, and in a moment when resources available for public services are significantly diminished, more so than I've seen in my almost 25 years working on the city's budget. And the importance of both federal and state help here cannot be overstated. There have been some steps taken by Congress to expand sick leave, expand unemployment, provide small business loans and grants and individual household payments. And then of course, we're going to be very reliant here on support from the feds through FEMA and stimulus packages to continue to provide public support and public services through our hospitals, our transit system, our airports, and our health system. And so I will stop there and turn the floor over to Joaquin.
Thank you, Ben. Give me one moment just to kind of pull up this screen here. Can everyone see the first slide in its total? Great. Still having issues being able to see. I just want to say to the Interfaith Council, and most specifically for the opening remarks, there's a lot of levity right now in the city, and I think the presentation from Ben provides us with that overview, especially from an economic perspective. And I just want to say on behalf of our Office of Economic and Workforce Development, Ben, how grateful I am for your leadership and your stable, controlled demeanor through this process, because it really has informed so much of the work that we have before us and that we have been engaging in since this crisis began. I also want to talk about the importance briefly of just the Interfaith Council's grounding in faith and hope as we look both to these times and how we can best be of service and also to the future. I can't tell you how personally it's needed during a time like this to be with the interfaith community right now, to be grounded in this way and reminded of the soulful purpose that we have and spiritual purpose that we have right now that needs to guide us through this crisis. As Ben talked about in terms of the number of people who have been impacted here in California, we've been seeing through the WARN notices, 50 employees or more through companies. 2.4 million Californians have applied for Californian benefits. We know that based on some of the notices that we have received to date, that we know that over 8,000 workers have been impacted. That does not include those smaller businesses of 50 employees or less. 151,000 employed in San Francisco is directly or partially impacted in our sectors here. And in some conversations we've had with some fintech partners, this is not by any means totally inclusive of merchant sales across the city, but through their lens, they're seeing approximately 70% down in sales, which definitively impacts our merchants. And then, of course, the impact to our hotel industry, which Ben touched on, in terms of down 90% in occupancy versus 1 year ago today. To put that in context, I believe, Ben, and correct me if I'm getting this incorrect, but post 9/11, we saw a decrease of 50%. And so again, it just speaks to the unprecedented nature of the situation that San Francisco and the country finds itself in today. So when we talk about support, I do want to begin that and again thank Ben for the levity as we engage in relief for our communities here, whether they're businesses, whether they're employees, or whether they're nonprofits, and the importance of state and federal relief and that ongoing advocacy that's essential to providing resources for businesses and employees. But we've been hard at work here. We've been hard at work in partnership with the Controller's Office, the Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office around immediate deferment and financial relief as it related to quarterly taxes and also to payments around fines and fees for our small businesses in order to defer that process. A very kind of street level example was being with the mayor, visiting some grocery stores before we went to a full shelter in place order, and a merchant kind of handed, well, do I need to pay this bill right now? And we said, no, actually do not pay that bill now. You have until much later date to do so. So please, reserve your resources as much as you can during this time to minimize the impact that's taking place. So those are the very real world responses that we need to be having right now to support people in a time of great confusion where it seems there is not much clarity either around when this will end or the severity and degree of the impact to themselves, their livelihoods, and those of their employees and workers and those that they serve. $10 million was provided to support the Workers and Families First paid sick leave program, which essentially would provide up to an additional week of paid sick leave for workers, and employers will be reimbursed for first exhausting their required paid sick leave for those employees, and then they would have a resource to look to. We've already seen that being exhausted by hundreds of employers, and this program was just released a little over a week and a half ago. So I can just tell you that highlights the need. In terms of rapid responses and our engagement with the employer communities when people have been laid off, we've served over 280 employees who have been impacted, about a little over 40 employers that we've engaged with, and that engagement continues in terms of providing webinars to individuals across the city to make sure that they have an understanding of what resources are available to them. Workforce opportunities through our jobs board, and also connectivity with the governor's Onward California website to make sure that as folks look to the state, they get redirected back here about where resources exist here at home for real jobs, because there is still a demand, especially amongst our essential services at this time. And then, of course, the access component, which is so important. You can always call 311 for anyone who's been impacted, but also oewd.org for a full set of what resources are available, whether you are, again, an employer, an employee, or a nonprofit, and get connected to both local resources and the ones that exist at the federal level. For small businesses, because we know that they have been so dramatically impacted right now, for those most especially who have not been able to keep their doors open in any way in this environment, we launched a small business resiliency fund. We did this before the shelter in place order, because we were seeing extreme xenophobic impacts in communities among our API population, and most specifically in Chinatown. We launched that program in Chinatown, but it was available citywide. That was an initial investment of $1 million that would support a little over 100 small businesses. To back up a little bit and talk about the demand and the need that we have, over 2,000 applications have been received to date. Over 2,000 applications have been received to date. So we know there is great need here, which is why we're also looking to the federal government's program about how that can provide relief to the small business community as well. We doubled that fund to $2 million just last week, I believe it is. It's hard to keep track of the days right now. To increase the amount of businesses that could be supported there. To put it in context, say you're a barbershop and we're thinking about a 90-day spectrum of relief. While we do have a commercial eviction moratorium in place, a residential eviction moratorium in place, we wanted to be sure that people actually had the resources to pay people back when it was time to come back online. A small barbershop, say in the Fillmore, might be have about a $3,100 a month rent. Certainly an up to $10,000 grant could be very supportive of them during a time like this, as does expanded benefits at the state level that would provide an employee up to $1,050 per week. So we know that pairing these programs and making sure people are aware of those programs is essential. We just launched earlier this week with a $9 million goal fund, the San Francisco Hardship Emergency Loan Program that would provide zero interest loans of up to $50,000 to each individual business. Our main partner at this time, we're still working on some others so we can disperse and connect with different communities through different partners and also leverage different partners' fundraising capabilities. A 0% interest loan program, again, focused on those smaller businesses who may not be able to find the same level of success in accessing the federal loan program. Of course, I mentioned those tax and fee deferrals. I spoke about the commercial eviction moratorium. And again, it's important to keep on focusing on oewd.org, COVID-19, oewd.org, for those that can connect with our services directly. If you don't speak to someone one-on-one immediately, they will call you back that same day. And they're being extremely responsive to the emails that you see on that line as well. As I mentioned, Onward California, that connects individuals to jobs at the state level. Of course, we've seen at the federal level the paid sick and family leave expansions through Speaker Pelosi's leadership at the national level. We had the pleasure of presenting with her on Monday during one of her town halls this week to speak about the importance of those resources for both workers and small businesses and what that means. I mentioned the unemployment expansion that expands what used to be the minimum cap of $450 a week to include an additional $600 on top of that, including now, speaking of a barbershop, say that those are not their employees. You have people that might be renting chairs, they're independent contractors. Previously, they would not be able to benefit from unemployment. Now they are. A major benefit to people in need during this time. Most recently, we've been working with many of our local financial institutions. We're reaching out to them right now to make sure that this Small Business Administration Paycheck Protection Program is being is successful in its pathways that it's creating to those resources. Up to $10 million, with sometimes a $10,000 grant, the full amount being forgivable. Should they retain workers at a certain level. We do encourage people, if they have not already, to talk with their individual lenders, to reach out to the SBA or to us to fill out those applications and get them in as quickly as possible. We are here to help you do that. So please let your congregants know that this is something essential. I mean, I think it goes without saying, so many of our small business members have already engaged in that process. Another anecdote, already have been speaking with an individual business who was having trouble with a lender, being able to reach out to the lender themselves and say, what's going on here? What is the access level? Or supporting advocacy levels at the federal level so the caps could be lifted so that banks could actually provide more relief to both their clients and others. That's a conversation that will continue to make sure that people have the access at this relief and resources that this relief is meant to provide. So both the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan are both available resources for small businesses during this time. And again, for any questions that you may have, if you have a question about what your lender is telling you, please do reach out to our office so we can be aware of that. The Treasurer and Tax Collector Jose Cisneros and his leadership is already reaching out to financial institutions to be sure that this program is working in the way that it was intended, and for us to troubleshoot from a policy perspective what additional amendments may need to be made to make this the most beneficial as possible. So again, I can't say it enough, oewd.org. Go to the website if you are an employer, an employee, or a nonprofit to find out what resources are available to you, and also to share with us. Please do not be shy. If there are complications that you're experiencing, that your congregations are experiencing, that your friends and family, your local merchants that you're still in contact with are experiencing, or their workers, please do reach out to us and let us know where complications are occurring. That's the on-the-ground elbow grease work that so many of our staff are doing right now. So with that, I just want to say thank you again so much for the opportunity to present today.
And thank you both to Ben and Joaquin. And Joaquin, I just wanted to let you know that in our daily updates that we're sending out to our 5,000 e-subscribers, realizing that so many of the people impacted are the people in the congregations, that your the information you've been sending out through your office has been invaluable, and we will continue to send those out. So please keep sending them to us.
Just one more comment. There is the additional question, especially right now, making sure that our resources are equitably distributed. We're in conversation with the Board of Supervisors, with the Office of Racial Equity, to make sure that this second $1 million, in addition to the resources that may come online, at least from a city perspective, are delivered and distributed in a way that people feel is equitable in its approach. I'm looking forward to adding that layer to our work during this process as well.
Thank you. To give you a sense of, we have three distinguished panelists who are going to be asking questions of you. Way back in 2008, during the Great Recession, the San Francisco Interfaith Council assumed a new leadership convening role, and that was convening the CEOs of the faith-based social service agencies. And you know them, they're 20 of the most prominent agencies in San Francisco who really provide the safety net for our most vulnerable residents. At that time, we were helping them together collectively navigate through budget cuts, which impacted programs and staff. And then when the economic boom happened, when tech came to San Francisco, a lot of them were impacted by the skyrocketing rents, and so many of them lost their leases. And so we worked with them through the displacement of nonprofits. And up until this time, we've been talking a lot about the recruitment and retention of staff. This pandemic has impacted not only their clients, but their agencies and their own staff themselves. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our three panelists, and then we will begin with the first. The first is Nancy Nielsen, who's the Deputy Director of Lutheran Social Services. She also serves as Secretary of the Board of the Interfaith Council. Mario Paz is the Executive Director for Good Samaritan Family Resource Center. He is also the Vice Chair of the Interfaith Council Board and the Vice Chair of the Immigrant Rights Commission for the City and County of San Francisco. Shari Woodridge is the Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul Society, which also houses one of the larger navigation centers on Division Street. Nancy, I'm going to turn the floor over to you for the first question.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael. So good to see all these familiar faces and to be part of this discussion. I reflect, as Michael said, in 2008, when we first convened the group of leaders of the faith-based social service agencies, we read around the table and shared our history and stories and realized that every one of us could trace our roots, our starting roots, back to the early days of the gold rush in San Francisco. Faith-based agencies have been serving the poor and vulnerable in this city for over 100 years. We are still here. We intend to keep doing our mission and serving the community, but we welcome the partnership of the city and county of San Francisco in this process. Particularly grateful to Ben's presentation, and also as part of the Human Services Network, your transparency, your support for our work is just very welcomed. If we had one question in all of this, because it is such an incredibly challenging time, but one thing I think we would hope that could continue in the contracting process for all of us is contract reform, structural reform, and we've been working on that for a long time. So we would hope that is not lost in this process, and we look forward to working through that. The image that comes to mind for most of us who do this work, it's a matter of accompanying one another, of walking together through these hard times. And we look forward to continuing to filling that role as the major safety net providers in the city. Our questions, it's no more of a question, but of a hope that as we come into this time of increasingly what feels like scarce resources, that is also usually accompanied and takes place in the time of the greatest need. So that in our struggle to share, as you have both commented, equitably in the resources, that we not lose sight of the great needs in our community that were there before this crisis, so that we can continue working together. So it's not so much of a question as to just say, can we keep up the good work? Can we keep going in the partnerships that we've had and establishing our working relationships? We look forward to doing that, and we hope that is a strong possibility.
Ben, Joaquin, will you just offer your thoughts on this aspiration?
I can certainly start, and I appreciate the comments. The success of our nonprofit human service providers in the city is inextricably linked to the city itself. Such a broad array of our social safety net and health services in the city are provided through the nonprofit community. And I know it's top of mind for me, the mayor, many others at the moment, that we run risks in moments like these, that we lose things that we can't get back. And so continuing to provide support for nonprofits during this time so that you can do good work remains top of mind for all of us. It's one of the reasons the city has quickly and then recently re-upped on a continuity of payment commitment, such that even if a nonprofit agency that the city contracts with isn't able to provide services because of this epidemic, that we will continue to pay them for those services. And I do think there's going to be another set of issues right behind this that will need work, including contract reform and other changes that are going to be required to help carry our nonprofit community through this. So I know you have my commitment and the mayor's commitment and many others to continue to work on that. I'll be actually presenting at the Human Service Network later this morning to kind of continue those conversations.
Great.
Joaquin, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly the sentiment that Ben touched on in terms of what the city position is here. And also it's one that will be part of the recovery conversation as well, once those begin in the coming weeks. And just how important that is, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a cultural perspective as well. I'm really drawn to Ben's comments around losing things that are so important and essential to our city. And that really is a guiding principle that needs to be brought into those conversations, whether we talk about the social safety net and the resources that we have there, but also all the work that's been done to advance prosperity for those most vulnerable are still the ones that we need to be laser focused on and serving during this time. And that's a principle that we're bringing in. And so it's great to be reminded of that today.
Thank you. Nancy's agency, Lutheran Social Services, is in the heart of the Tenderloin. Now let's move to the mission. Mario Paz, Executive Director of Good Samaritan Family Resource Center. When I need to tap the pulse of the mission and especially our immigrant population, Mario is so in touch with this. Mario, would you at this point offer your thoughts and your question?
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone. And I hope all of you and your loved ones are staying strong and healthy during this extraordinary time. And again, I want to thank the leadership of the Interfaith Council, our staff, Michael and Cynthia, our great chair, Kashif Roy, and especially want to show deep appreciation for Joaquin Torres and Ben Rosenfield for your incredible leadership and guiding our city during these tough times. As many of you know, before this health crisis, our immigrant residents were already facing incredible hardships. They were facing fear and discrimination due to an anti-immigrant political climate and policies such as public charge that limit access to public resources. As you also are aware of, our low-income immigrant residents were the first to lose their sources of income during this crisis. Most of them work in the service and restaurant industry, and most of them are not also reflected in all of the great data that Joaquin Torres just shared. We literally have thousands of other San Francisco residents that do not have money to pay for food or pay for their rent. And they are also not eligible for all of the benefits coming through the CARES Act. And those that are eligible have fear in applying because they feel it may impact their immigration status. As you know, our faith-based social service agencies have always been the lifeline for our immigrant residents and the most vulnerable, whether it's feeding the hungry or sheltering the homeless. And we are facing a demand for support and help that we've never faced before. And these are certainly very uncertain times. I can share with you heartbreaking stories within our own organization that's been serving San Francisco now for 125 years of families living in substandard housing conditions, up to 17, 20 residents in a small apartment who are now sheltering in place and have no food to eat and don't know what they're gonna, and are trying living day by day. And it's heartbreaking, and it's creating an incredible amount of trauma, not just for them, but for our staff who are trying to support them, as many of my colleagues from the other faith-based social service institutions will let you know. So what we've learned during this crisis is that our faiths and our health are intertwined. And we're not going to be able to get through this unless we all work together. So first, I'd like to ask, how is our city preparing to serve these vulnerable residents, given that they aren't going to be eligible for many of the public supports? And how can we work together? That's the only, we are extremely, extremely worried about what we're going to be facing. This for us is just the beginning. The people we serve, again, we're the first to be impacted and will be the last to be able to recover from the economic impact of this situation. And so any perspective that you can share, how we can work together will be helpful. And again, I want to thank you for your leadership. Ben, and Joaquin, your communications are comforting. It helps a little bit with the uncertainty to our sector. We still have a lot of questions and a lot of worries, but we really appreciate the transparency. Thank you.
Why doesn't Joaquin start on this one? And then I can layer in behind.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you, Mario, and thank you so much for your leadership, especially during a time that's extremely scary. I don't think there's another word for it, for our undocumented population. And those workers that we want to support during this time, irrespective of their federal work authorization. The conversation that's been had to date is one that was considered as the mayor set up her philanthropic fund, give2sf.org, which is focused on the following three areas. Housing stabilization, which of course would include partnerships that would be led by the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development once funding has been made available for that service. As you mentioned, most importantly, and one of the first allocations that's gone into that bucket, as the controller shared yesterday at Budget and Finance Committee, was food security. In what form that will take is being developed right now by the Human Services Agency. I'm in direct conversations with them about that right now, specifically on how our undocumented population will be served through those efforts. We're in conversations with Supervisor Ronan's office, Supervisor Chair Fewer's office, Supervisor Yee's office, and Supervisor Walton's office. Also about Supervisor Walton's proposal, where he gained commitment from the mayor for $6 million to support vulnerable populations, which of course includes families and undocumented families here in San Francisco. How that program and how those resources, will roll out is something that's being discussed right now, and one of my priorities for the day once this meeting is over, to ensure that people have the resources necessary to get through this time. Whether that's in a direct card that people might receive to support them in these areas, or whether it's through a gift card to grocery stores to support them with their food security issues. I believe something similar to what we did with Good Samaritan in the past, and with La Raza Central Resource Center, with Melba Maldonado, another member of Latino Parity and Equity Coalition. As part of our efforts, we will see. Those details will need to be worked out now so we can find out who the best and most accessible partners are that have the comfortability and comfort and familiarity of working with a population who are very scared right now.
Thank you, Ben.
I think the only thing I'd add to what Joaquin said is I don't know that we have answers for all of these questions, but we can at least acknowledge that we understand the same issues that you're identifying, Mario. It's kind of the scale of a lot of this at the moment is hard to get our heads around, I think. It's unlike anything most of us have ever lived through economically. And I think you're absolutely correct in identifying, first of all, that unemployment surges we're going to see here in the city and are already seeing are heavily concentrated in service industries and lower wage industries, and that those industries are disproportionately populated by immigrants and folks that, because of negligence in DC, are going to be carved out of benefit programs that are flowing down to us from Washington. And those are the most meaningful resources available here at the moment. And so I know that Joaquin and the mayor and others have taken steps here. I know Supervisor Walton has a proposal pending that speaks to this as well, that I know Joaquin and others are working on to try to take local steps to help. I don't have much to offer other than we recognize the issue and would be, of course, interested in continuing to partner on solutions that we can offer here locally.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Joaquin. We look forward to being partners with you. At this very moment, we are distributing cash cards and diapers at Good Samaritan right now. So we look forward to continuing to support. I know we're in this together, so we very much appreciate all your leadership and support.
Thank you so much, Mario.
Thank you. You know, interfaith councils come into existence usually as a response to a crisis. And over 3 decades ago, by a call of the city, the Interfaith Council here in San Francisco came into existence in a question and an appeal to help respond to the homeless crisis that emerged 30 years ago. We opened our doors, and our communities of faith have been feeding and sheltering through the Interfaith Winter Shelter Program ever since. A turning point in our life came in late in 2014 when Mayor Lee asked us to be the funder and the recipient of a $3 million gift to fund the first navigation center. And since then, we have seen those navigation centers replicated throughout the city. Our final panelist, Sherry Woodridge, is from St. Vincent de Paul, is on the front lines of this in terms of sheltering. Shari, I'm wondering if you could give us your perspective and offer your question.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for having me. This is definitely a privilege with all the longtime service providers that are faith-based. As you know, St. Vincent de Paul, we run the largest single adult shelter, MSC, on 5th and Bryant. And any given time, we can have 410 people in the building at one time. We also do the Division Circle Navigation Center, which is currently 186 people. Also, we have Riley Center, which is providing services for domestic violence survivors. We have a transitional housing program as well as an emergency shelter. So as you know, we have definitely been impacted by this virus. We currently have 5 people out of MSC that have been diagnosed positive with the virus and have been moved out of the shelter and into isolation. And we have 1 client that has been moved out of Division Circle. So we are definitely impacted. And what this has done has put fear into our staff. So our staff are not coming into work. We are definitely in need of any kind of staff, anyone who's willing to come in and help us. Because both shelters open 24 hours. So it's a huge need. And so it's good to know that the workforce is there. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to make sure that we can find anyone who'd be willing to work temporarily if they're impacted currently by a loss of or a close of a current business. So that would help if someone could come and help with us. I know that we're a union house, but at some point, you know, as suggestions for contract modifications, being able to work with non-union folks, also being able to have some type of incentive pay for those union people that continue to come on a day-to-day basis. I think with the acknowledgement that we're going to get some additional funding to help with that, it's going to be great, because we do have some dedicated staff that do come, but they know they're on the front lines. They're scared. They're worried about catching the virus themselves, but we need to have their experience and their passion, compassion, and values to continue to help us and operate the shelters. Because if we don't have staff, we can't have the shelters open, and that's, you know, almost 500 and some people out on the street. So that would be my suggestion for some modifications in the contract, just having that little caveat that during an emergency, we have some flexibility with our budget line item for salaries to be able to do some kind of incentive pay. And then I'll definitely work with Joaquin's group and try to see if we can get some staff into our.
Great.
Your response?
Yes, I just reached out to one of our representatives. It's working with Jeff Kaczynski, formerly the head of the Homelessness and Supportive Housing Office, who's been at the EOC. So I can do some follow-up for you right now, okay?
It'd be great. Yes, perfect. Thank you. As soon as I get to the office, I will be working on that.
I'll only add that the issues you're raising, Sherry, have been top of mind and the subject of many calls I've been on in the last week with our emergency management center. I know we have recently authorized additional money pushed out to operators on the front lines of this to hopefully be able to provide some additional resources that can be used for worker retention. We know that that's a big issue for our shelter operators and others. They're exactly parallel issues that the city workforce itself is having in our hospitals at the moment. And so we certainly appreciate it. The city is in the midst of a very large request out to city employees as well for redeployment as disaster service workers, and gaps in our shelter systems is on that list.
Okay, great.
And lastly, to contract flexibility, our latest guidance, which we pushed out to contracting departments, did encourage contract flexibility at this moment. The usual kind of line item controls that the city imposes through our nonprofit contracts. This is a moment for us to be loosening those rules to allow contractors to move money to where it's needed most.
Okay, that helps. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And just for some additional guidance, Sherry, I think also given the fear factor that people are experiencing, you're not alone in that. I mean, I think there are many individuals who are either working at the EOC that we were just being briefed yesterday by Mary Ellen Carroll, the head of the Department of Emergency Management, around issues of staffing, who are staffing there at the EOC, and those very real feelings. I think that it might be useful to help alleviate some of that concern, at the very least, a little is to look at some of the CDC guidelines that were just published late last night that can speak to that a bit, to give you some guidance as well. And I know that we at the city, I believe, Ben, are assessing that as well as we begin to bring more of the workforce in to do this work and provide people with a sense of comfort as we rise up to the necessity of the moment, right?
I will say, though, that because we do have positive cases on our locations, DPH has been sending nurses and doctors and health workers to come in and talk to. I mean, we've intensified our screening on a daily basis, so they are there, they are visible, so that's helping. But there is that additional education that's required to go to the staff to say, make sure you wash your hands, keep your face covered, that kind of stuff. Stay 6 feet apart. But that is also a challenge in the shelters too, because with 295 people on one floor, there's no way that we can be 6 feet apart with the clients sleeping there. So we have this huge challenge with our large shelters, and so we're working through that as best we can.
Thank you, Shari, and thank you to our other two panelists, Nancy Nielsen, Deputy Director of Lutheran Social Services, and Mario Paz of Good Samaritan Family Resource Center. I also want to thank Ben Rosenfield, our City Controller, and Joaquin Torres, the Director of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, for their time today, as well as our Chair, Kaushik Roy, and Rabbi Michael Lezak of Glide Church's Center for Social Justice. This has been a very rich conversation, and I want to thank you all because this is the first in a series. So we're cutting our teeth on this today, and you all have just lent to the rich mosaic of what has been offered. This program will be disseminated. The link will be disseminated later today to our broader audience. We want to thank those who have joined us here online. And I want to remind you that next week's program will address the issue of mental and behavioral health and the impact the coronavirus has had on that, with special focus on social isolation, fear, anxiety, services and resources available to faith leaders to respond. I just want to say to all of you too, as we find ourselves in these very sacred and fragile days, that the prayers of our 800 communities of faith are with you all. May God bless you and may God keep you. Thank you for joining us.